is a country that now is the recording here. I got just the recording message here. Well, I was saying that I am originally from Angola, and Angola is a country that had civil war, and so we face some challenges. Some people still not satisfied the way things are going. So, and so there is some insecurity issues which have not been addressed properly. So this topic is very important. And so transitional justice is vital to provide sustaining peace and protect human rights. This is, and protecting human rights can contribute to environmental failure to protect human rights can contribute to environmental degradation. This is on the one hand. On the other hand, if you don't protect the environment, this can lead to violation of human rights. So human rights like rights to life, health, housing, and so forth. So an effective policy on transitional justice must address the environment and natural resources. So this is essentially the core aspect of this project, and we thank Munini for leading us on this. So thank you so much, and I wish I think this is going to be a good time for us to discuss. Although I will need to leave earlier because I just got the invitation to be part of this event. I would say I already had a previous appointment, so we will need to leave a little earlier. But thank you so much, and welcome everybody.
Thank you, Octavio, for the brief remarks and for confirming that transitional justice is actually important to protect human rights by protecting the environment, since they're intertwined, and thus the need for a comprehensive policy that encompasses all that. I will now invite Sarah Hamel from the Bosch Alumni Network to also give us a few opening remarks. Welcome, Sarah.
Thank you very much, Agatha, for this introduction. And yeah, happy to be here, everyone. Happy to see some of you again, although just online. Maybe just briefly, let me start to give you an idea where this project comes from and where the Bosch network comes in. So I actually met both Munini and Agatha for the first time live when it was still possible in Rwanda. It was 2019, and it was a kickoff for the Bosch network in Africa. And it was pretty much about bringing different regions in Africa together, so members from different regions, and exchanging on joint interests, but also brainstorming how the network can support each other ideas, work, so also professionally and personally. And I was quite happy to see Munini again, this time actually virtually, roughly a year ago, on a video pitch, where Munini advocated passionately for more accountability mechanisms. And I remember that we had a little pitch training before. So I actually went back and had a short look. And if you don't mind, Munini, me summarizing some of your points you made in the pitch. And she started with actually questions, which was quite smart. So she would start, for example, and say, did you know that over 40% of the conflict in Africa are related to natural resources? Did you know that almost 20 countries have national peace processes in place to help societies transition from conflict to peace? And did you know that actually the African Union's transitional justice policy from 2019 failed to make reference to environmental aspects within it? So the big question emerged, what can we do? And then she went on of describing this series of online sessions, bringing actors across regions again together to really draft formulations or proposed guidelines to be considered for the African Union. And you can already tell that our network loves ambitious and passionate people. So her project got selected by other members to be implemented. And this is pretty much why we are here and why we were able to hold this series. And maybe just to sum it up, I think the project really demonstrated from our perspective the potential of both using collective expertise, collective intelligence of people working on these issues for a longer time to really inquire the concepts that we are working with, to question assumptions, but also explore approaches to come up with something better than there is today, but also how bridging sectors and organizations and regions can create an international discussion on this issue. And I think Monini is the best example herself, by bringing very different skills I have learned in the course of this project. So not only obviously project management, the research, she's a drafter, writer, facilitator, networker, and activist, but also combining these two organizations, also again for this event tonight. So the Bosch Alumni Network and PAX. And I'm really glad that we had this time together. And I'm also really glad that you actually reached your very ambitious goal of proposing some guidelines that we're going to discuss today. And yeah, I can just stress, I'm really looking forward to tonight, and I hope we're going to stay in touch. And with that, back to you, Agatha.
Thank you, Sarah. I couldn't agree more that this project really was very timely, and to also applaud Monini and to thank you, Sarah, because if you hadn't bought her pitch, really we wouldn't be here. And I have to agree that the fact that we are targeting the drafters of the policy and not only just approaching them, but actually taking through this process spearheaded by Monini, taking the initiative to draft the regulations, really, it is remarkable. So now allow me to invite the last speaker to give the opening remarks. And this is Mr. John Body from the African Union. John, if you're here, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much, Agatha. And let me say a big thank you to the Birch Network for the interest that you guys have in the African Union Transitional Justice Policy. But more importantly, let me say a big thank you to Monini for her passion and also for her commitment, and most especially for wanting to be part of the transformative agenda that the African Union is currently pushing. I say thank you because it's not common, for you to see different people, particularly youths, coming up with interest and also coming up with ideas on how to improve African Union policy instrument. And that is the reason why I'm saying a big thank you to Monini and also to the Birch Network for your interest in the African Union Transitional Justice policy. As you may be aware, the African Union Transitional Justice policy was adopted in February 2019. And prior to that, in order for us to make sure that we have what one might call a comprehensive continental policy, we embark on different consultations, including women, across the continent, the youths, people living with disability, the elderly women, and name them. And that is the reason why if you Google African Union Transitional Justice Policy, you will see different consultation with the women, with the youth. And at the end of the day, we were able to come up with a draft policy, which we, at the technical level, we submitted to the AU policy making organs. In the African Union, we have what we call the Specialized Technical Committee. We have different. type of specialized technical committee. And we have this particular one called the STC on Justice and Legal Affairs that is responsible for finalizing the African Union policy instruments and also normative frameworks. And we were informed that, this AUTJP is too bulky. And I remember vividly, one of the questions that was posed to us is this a PhD thesis? And so we were asked to go back to the drawing board and we began to look at it, to review so many things. So the initial draft encompasses so many issues, including environment, including ICC, and so many other things. But at the end of the day, we were asked to say that, look, this is not a document that we are forcing down the throats of the African Union member states, and that this policy is meant for member states to look at it and contextualize it. And so that is the reason why you can see that there are some things that are not covered, but it is not unintentional. As you guys, we also bear with, get to understand that environment and natural resources, they are critical issues on the continent. And when you look at you look at the continent, particularly you look at the West Africa, and you look at the challenges with environments and the conflict crisis, particularly between the herders and also the farmers, it has caused a lot of problem. And also when you even come to the eastern part of the country, you also see similar challenges, conflict crisis as a result of the environmental degradation and some other challenges like that. We also have a lot of challenges with regards to natural resources management on the continent. The issues of corruption and other related issues. And so that is the reason why we are very happy that you guys are able to come up with this particular document, the guidelines, the guiding line notes. We decided to make our own little bit of amendment to say a supplementary note. The reason is not unconnected with the fact that when you say guideline, remember that we are dealing with member states who will also make use of the document that we are trying to produce. And so when you say a guideline, it's like, telling them this is how to go about it. And at times, member states, whether the European Union and any other, intergovernmental organization don't like things like that. They would rather prefer the civil society or organization like you have something like, a supplementary note that will complement the implementation of the African Union Transitional Justice policy. And so that was the reason why we decided to make little recommendation that it should be make a supplementary note. And so we have gone through the documents and it's very, very relevant. And I believe it will help us a lot. As you know, you guys are expert on, environment. When I was reading the document, it got to a time and I was asking myself, do environment has rights? and I was seriously educated. And so we really appreciate the work that you are doing. We look forward to partnering with you. It's not only on the environment. We have also received criticism from some scholars and experts saying that, the policy is not, too handy when it comes to mental health and also the issues of psychosocial support, to the victims. And so we welcome different ideas on how to improve this particular policy. And we do believe that we can collaborate in one way or the other, to support our member states, injecting issues like environment, natural resources to their into their transitional justice program. As you may be aware, we have so many African Union member states that are currently implementing or developing their transitional justice program. Countries like, South Sudan, Mali, Libya, name them. And the issue of environment is also very peculiar and it's also very important, in their transitional justice program. So we do look forward to the completion of this particular supplementary note. And in joining forward, it's not just coming up with a supplementary note. For me, as officer leading the African Union program on transitional justice, I believe in walking the talk, So we will look beyond just mere having a document, but to also look at how we can concretely, in time of practical action, to journey along with some of our member states in ensuring that natural resources and also the issues of environment are integrated into their transitional justice program. So on this note, I want to say thank you. Thank you for inviting the African Union, and thank you for being part of the African Union program on transitional justice. I wish us a fruitful deliberation and impactful outcome. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bodi. I hope I am not massacring your name.
John,
yeah, thank you for the opening remarks and for embracing the initiative and actually acknowledging that the youth are a key player in the transformative agenda that Africa is pushing for, and for agreeing that we should move beyond these initiatives and pursue contextualization. And we trust that these notes will be useful in addressing environmental related conflicts in our various contexts. Actually, I would just also want to say that it's remarkable that the AU is open to receiving ideas to improve the policy and also for the willingness to collaborate and to implement the outcomes that will emanate from this policy. And now I want to invite Munini Mutuku. This is the bulk of this webinar. And to again reiterate, Munini, that this is such a significant undertaking. So I am welcoming you now to take us through the views and opinions from the African region, to tell us what the note contains when it comes to promoting and enriching the environment and national resources governance through transitional justice processes and mechanisms. The floor is yours, Munini.
Thank you very much, Agatha, and allow me also to thank our speakers who've gone before me. Octavio, Sarah, and John, thank you so much. And thank you so much for those kind compliments. And allow me to say that I come as one, but I stand as 1,000 people who have the passion that I have, people who have helped me understand the concepts. I want to acknowledge Karen, you're here. You've written papers that I have read. Dr. Kariuki Muigwa, you've written papers that I've read, Jensen, Carl, and a lot of other papers that I've gone through that have really helped me conceptualize the idea that I had and make it something that can be concrete and that can be called a supplementary note. Allow me also to mention what Agatha has said. It's so encouraging to see the African Union open to receive this kind of support and for them to also give this kind of support to initiatives like this. Most of the time we know the African Union to be distant, but I can testify that the African Union is actually close to the people and is actually welcoming input as we continue to make this continent a better place to live in. And also to appreciate the support of NPACs and the support of Bosch alumni. And more importantly, the support of our participants who have been with us through this journey since we started in May 2021. We have had people who have followed up and who have continued participating, giving their comments. We sincerely appreciate. So allow me to mention that we had a number of regional discussions where we had participants from Southern Africa, West Africa, Central Africa, Eastern Africa, Northern Africa, and also the IGAD COMESA region where we had representatives from Somalia and Egypt. And a number of issues came up within these discussions, and I'm going to just mention in snapshots a number of the things that are mentioned. I will not mention everything, but I want to reckon that these discussions are recorded on YouTube and they have been posted on the Environmental Peacebuilding Association website. And Shella will actually share the link where you can get those recordings. Allow me also to mention that this is a discussion. So please feel free to correct, to add value, to remove, and to give input to the document. It's a living document and it's a draft document. As we continue to prepare it, we welcome your input. So one of the things that came up was the diversity of issues within the regions where we were holding these discussions. We had regions where they had mining challenges, either mining challenges, that is the extractive industry, that was participating in extractives during conflicts or in times when there are no conflicts, but because of the extractive activities, then conflicts emanated from those activities. We have regions where we had active conflicts, and I want to reckon that we had a participant from South Sudan, Somalia, and also Cameroon. We had regions where the countries had gone through transitional justice processes and they shared with us. And I want to recognize Rwanda participated, and also we had South Sudan, which has gone through and which is still going through And we also had issues of the marine or the blue economy. We can say we had a participant from Rwanda who was working within this area of marine, and that is fisheries. We also had participation from indigenous peoples, and we had a participant from the Ogoni peoples. We also had the question of multiple layers of conflicts that have been witnessed within these various countries and that affect resources within the various regions. One issue that came up almost within all the discussions was the issue of capacity building, either capacity building of states, whereby we need to build the capacity of institutions that are dealing with environment and natural resources, or courts and the judicial processes. People and community participation also came up very key, whereby it was mentioned that people need to participate in decisions that have to do with environment and natural resources that affects them and natural resources that they use. Climate change came up, and it was also mentioned to be a threat multiplier. And it was mentioned that when we deliberately abuse and destroy the environment, and then we still have climate change issues coming up, then we have more problems. Extractive industry that came up in a lot of the discussions, and it is a question of the extractive industry being blamed for the destructions a lot of the time. The laxity of government or the lack of capacity of governments to be able to hold extractive industries accountable, the lack of enforcement mechanisms to monitor the activities of extractive industries, and also challenging the challenges of the judicial systems to hold the extractive industry to account. We also had the question of activists or advocates who have been devastated or even killed because of engaging in activism against the work of extractive industries. That was mentioned especially among the Ogoni people, where Ken Saro and was mentioned amongst other people who have suffered in this continent because of activism against the abuse of extractive industry. We did have the question of women and natural resources coming up. That was especially Ms. Kandra, who works with women in Somalia. The question of governance also came up, where countries within the region, it was recommended that they should cooperate when it comes to the access, the use of natural resources. An example was given, for instance, in countries like South Sudan or in Congo, where we see illegal logging going on, but the transportation and the sale of those materials from the environment or from the nature are actually being done in countries that are neighboring the same countries where this is happening. So a call to cooperate in the governance of resources at a regional level. The relationship between the states and communities is something that also came up, which it was mentioned that it needs to improve the way the governments treat the communities and the way the communities also respond to the government when it comes to extraction or the use and access of natural resources. Sustainable exploitation. It was mentioned that the people are not against extractive or the use of natural resources, but what they are calling for is the responsible, respectful, consultative, and monitored exploitation of these resources, and also a fair distribution of the revenues that come from these resources. The questions of laws, policies, and programs was also mentioned, where some of them are quite disjointed, where we have, they work in silos instead of having an integrated way of managing the resources in questions. These gaps were mentioned, and it was also mentioned that within the laws, the threshold for proof for many cases when it comes to the abuse and crimes of natural resources is quite high and sometimes is not able to be proved. So for that reason, then you have challenges with holding either companies or governments or communities accountable when it comes to the abuse and harm to the natural resources and the environment. Challenges with environmental justice work that I have mentioned, where we have people who have been killed or activists who have even been sued by companies because of the work they are doing. Natural resource-based conflicts were mentioned, and one of the countries that was key on the spot was Mozambique, with the current conflict where minerals and gas has been discovered. We had the case of South Sudan, Congo, the Niger Delta, where the Ogoni people live. We also have the question of economic, social, and cultural links to environment and the people. Most of the time, transitional justice has a gap where it elevates civil and political rights, and economic, social, and cultural rights seem to fall in the cracks. So there was a recommendation that these two rights, or classes of rights, if you can put them, need to be treated at par in transitional justice. Someone said, most peace agreements don't address natural resources as a human right issue, but as a reform issue. So if it was treated as a human right issue, then we would see a lot of economic, social, and cultural rights addressed within this framework. The African human rights system was also put on the spot, where it was called upon to be more accountable and to enhance efforts within the continent when it comes to issues of environmental justice. Colonial legacy on the extractive resources. The need for continued engagement was also mentioned. The traditional knowledge and mechanisms need to be incorporated in the modern way of doing things. So those are some of the issues that came up in the 8 or 9 webinars that we had. And out of all the issues that are discussed, then we developed the supplementary note. And allow me to request Sheila to share the PowerPoint on that. So we are now looking at the supplementary note to the African Union Transitional Justice Policy on environment and natural resources in transitional justice processes and mechanisms that we have developed as a product of this process. Thank you. So to start off, what is the objective of this supplementary note? It seeks to provide a framework that will promote and enrich environment and natural resource governance in transitional justice processes and mechanisms. As I had mentioned, often transitional justice looks at the human rights atrocities that happen within conflict and post-conflict and post-war societies. But then it really provides the redress for environmental abuse and crimes. But then it sends the very same people to whom it addresses their human rights violations to the very same environment, which most of the time is abused and depleted and degraded, only for them to suffer more harm. So this framework is calling for the incorporation or for attention to be given to the very environment and the very natural resources where we live in. This supplementary note is grounded or has the backing of the legal institutional frameworks within the African human rights system. And one of them is the Constitutive Act of the African Union. I'm not sure if we can all see the PowerPoint. Sheila, I'm on slide 3. Is that showing? Because from my end, I can only see slide 1.
Yeah, we also seen just slide 1. Okay.
Okay. Oh, great. Thank you. So I'm looking at the legal and institutional frameworks, and one of them is the Constitutive Act of the African Union, which within its framework has established a specialized technical committee on natural resources and the environment. The African Charter on Human and People's Rights talks about collective rights of the people. And within this collective, it contains provisions that also talk about natural resources and the environment. And especially Article 21 stands out, which talks about the people shall freely dispose of their wealth and natural resource, which includes people participation, government participation, and discussions in reference to that wealth and natural resources. Another framework is the African Convention on the Conservation of Nature and Natural Resources. This is called the Algiers Convention, which was developed in 1963, but we see that there has been a revision of the same, and we have a new one that was revised and in 2003. And the reason why it was revised is because there are a lot of efforts that have gone into the human rights, development, and environmental arena. And so this convention had to come to date. And so it was reviewed. And it has at least 3 objectives. One of them is to enhance environmental protection, which is what this supplementary note seeks to advocate for. Another objective is to foster the conservation and sustainable use of natural resources and to harmonize and coordinate policies in this field. Another framework is the Malabo Protocol. which is an amendment to the protocol on the statute of the African Court of Justice and Human Rights, and it provides for the redress of crimes related to the illegal exploitation of natural resources and trafficking of hazardous waste. Another framework is a policy on post-conflict reconstruction and development. This policy envisages within many of its provisions that the African countries that are emerging from conflict will give consideration to environmental and natural resource factors. Another framework is the decisions of the African Commission on Human and People's Rights. And many a times sometimes these decisions have reflected the need to take care and to have a responsibility on the environment. It reaffirms the state's responsibilities in ensuring natural resource stewardship. So the question is, what are these guiding principles that we are proposing? We have 9 of them. And the first says, transitional justice processes and mechanisms, when they are applied within the African continent, especially within the African Union Transitional Justice Policy. 1, they should consider the environment and natural resources as victims of conflict or war, as beneficiaries of the transitional justice process, and as subjects of rights. 2, they should consider human rights victims of post-conflict environmental abuse and crimes as environmental victims, and they should be treated as victims. 3, they should ensure that transitional justice processes and mechanisms are designed to embrace post-conflict environmental and natural resource atrocities. 4, they should promote the consideration of environmental and natural resource aspects in peace agreements. 5, they should strengthen post-conflict peace processes to ensure the right to live in a healthy environment is achieved. 6, prioritize the rehabilitation, restoration, remediation, and conservation of the environment and its natural resources in transitional justice. 7, take into account environment and natural resource atrocities that violate economic, social, and cultural rights. 8, entrench post-conflict environmental and natural resource impact assessments in post-conflict needs assessment processes. And lastly, they should formulate post-conflict reconstruction and development policies and programs that promote sustainable protection of the environment. So from here, we are going to look at what exactly do these principles entail in integrity? What do they entail? So Shala, you will share the Word document, which has more detail.
Harry? Oh, there we go.
Oh, great. Okay, thank you. So we are going to look at principle number 1, which we said is consider the environment and natural resources as victims of conflict and war, beneficiaries of the transitional justice process, and subjects of rights. And what is proposed is that transitional justice mechanisms and processes should broaden their focus and pursue accountability related to environmental and natural resource related abuse, crimes, and harms. They should consider the non-human, biotic, and abiotic components as victims when destruction and degradation caused by conflicts or war and authoritarian regimes affects their functionality as part of an ecosystem. They should grant protection on the basis of their intrinsic worth, on the conception of the rights of nature, and on the basis of the moral obligation and duty of care. These mechanisms should adopt an expansive definition of the term victim within transitional justice to include the victim as specific environments, natural resources, or ecosystems. They should adopt reparation frameworks and reparative measures that are eco-sensitive and environmentally transformative. And lastly, within this principle, they should take cognizance of the cumulative effects of colonialism and neo-colonial practices on the environment and natural resources. That is principle number 1. Principle number 2 says, consider human victims of post-conflict environmental and natural resource abuse and crimes as environmental victims. So the transitional justice mechanisms and processes should, 1, as a minimum, provide a platform for acknowledgement of the victim's victimization emanating from war and conflict-related environmental and natural resource atrocities. For instance, if you pollute the water, I drink that water, I get sick in a war situation, I am a victim, and I should be provided a platform for the acknowledgement of that victimization. 2, officially acknowledge the harm perpetrated through environmental atrocities to the human population. This serves to reinforce the message of the seriousness of the situations in question and also as a cathartic measure for the human victims. This is here because most of the time it's taken for granted when environmental atrocities affect the human population. It's usually not mentioned within transitional justice processes. Thirdly, transitional justice mechanisms and processes should allow the utilization of victim impact statements to establish, amongst other factors, 1, environmental abuse and crimes committed, perpetrators, violations of natural resource rights of the populations in question, the role of natural resources in enabling the human rights atrocities, and in the targeting of victims of the conflict. Most often, for instance, the Truth and Justice and Reconciliation Commissions usually take statements from victims. So this principle is proposing that you will take statements from victims with an environmental and natural resource angle, not only with a human angle. And the third point under this principle is promote people participation and view the people as partners and not consumers of the transitional justice process. That is principle number 2. And I encourage our participants, if you have questions, please write them down and then we can take them later or put them on the chat. So principle number 3 says, ensure that transitional justice processes and mechanisms are designed to embrace post-conflict environmental and natural resources. Transitional justice mechanisms and processes should, 1, premise their operations on the balance between intrinsic value of the non-human environment and the human self-interest, and not reproduce the idea of a separation of humans and nature. 2, conciliate the relation between humans and the environment, recognizing and accepting the interdependence and interconnectedness of all beings, other than the individuality of being. 3, besides normative areas, seek to understand the environmental attitudes and values in the respective African traditions of thought, paying attention to the epistemological and metaphysical dimensions. Transitional justice mechanisms should reorient themselves in ways that make them part of the solution to the large global environmental problems, including climate change, that are a major threat to all forms of life that we now face. And lastly, under this principle, transitional justice mechanisms and processes should endeavor to hold accountable the beneficiaries of environment and natural resource assets who are either actors or non-actors in their conflict. Principle number 4. It says promote the consideration of environmental and natural resource aspects in peace agreements. Transitional justice mechanisms and processes should, 1, ensure peace agreements in transitional processes recognize the multidimensional and complex nature of conflict environment connections and make provisions for the environment and natural resources to be an entry point for peace building. They should ensure provisions within peace agreements recognize environment and natural resources as victims of abuse and crimes, beneficiaries of the transitional justice process, subjects of rights, and influencing factors in non-economic issues like culture, institutional creation and management, justice, power sharing arrangements, amongst others. 3, transitional justice mechanisms should leverage restoration or conservation opportunities that have, as a result of the war, emerged. And lastly, in their efforts at distributed justice, they should afford paramount consideration to the environmental and natural resources. Principle number 5. Strengthen post-conflict peace processes to ensure the right to live in a healthy environment is achieved. And it says that transitional justice mechanisms and processes should, 1, incorporate an African philosophy of environment, which has a background belief in the linkage of nature, community, and man from which an ethical relationship is defined. They should recognize that a healthy environment is a necessary precondition for the promotion of a wide range of socio-economic factors and the enjoyment of several recognized rights, like those relating to an adequate standard of living, culture and spirituality, self-determination, the right to life, the right to health, and its underlying determinants like food, water, and nutrition, amongst others. They should uphold a healthy environment as a fundamental right that is primary to all creatures, the ecological balance, the living space, the quality of life, and the health of human beings, including the generations that are unborn. They should go beyond physical surroundings to incorporate concerns of life-sustaining ecosystems that influence the social and cultural conditions of an individual and communities. That is the right to live in a healthy environment. Principle number 6, it says, prioritize the rehabilitation, restoration, remediation, and conservation of the environment and its natural resources within transitional justice. Transitional justice mechanisms and processes should, 1, recognize that an important building block in peace building and sustainable post-conflict reconstruction and development is the reclamation of the environment and natural resources from the legacy of landmines, unexploded remnants of war, toxic waste dumping, oil spillage, mine holes, amongst other degrading substances. These mechanisms and processes should call upon states, the international community, and diverse actors to provide support to transitional justice initiatives addressing the legacy of landmines, unexploded remnants of war, toxic waste dumping, oil spillage, mine holes, and aftermaths of war and conflict. 3, they should call for the mandatory and urgent cleanup of the environment and natural resources in post-conflict scenarios for the population to find safety from elements found within the environment that make it unsafe for settlement and unfit for social, cultural, and economic activities. These mechanisms and processes should draw caution to the post-conflict coping strategies of concerned population that may lead to further damage to the environment and natural resources. And principle number 7, take into account environment and natural resource atrocities that violate economic, social, and cultural rights. Transitional justice mechanisms and processes should, 1, give civil and political rights and the economic, social, and cultural rights no hierarchy of one set of rights over the other. They should all be given an equal platform in transitional justice. These mechanisms should emphasize the indivisibility of human rights in post-conflict societies and adequately seek to incorporate economic, social, and cultural aspects which have remained marginalized in their implementation in the field of transitional justice. These mechanisms and processes should tackle the vulnerability of the societies in question, especially as they relate to the impact of environmental and natural resource crimes and abuses on the economic, social, and cultural rights. They should prioritize the vulnerability of minority, indigenous, and other communities who have economic, social, and cultural practices that depend on the natural environment and its elements. And lastly, these mechanisms and processes should ensure public consultation and participation is keen to incorporate issues that resonate to the public and to promote the do no harm principle. Principle number 8, entrench post-conflict environmental and natural resource assessments in post-conflict needs assessment processes. Here, just to note, after conflict or war, there's usually a conflict needs assessment that tries to understand what are the priorities that need to be addressed so that the country can go back, or the society can go back to stability or economic growth. So those are the post-conflict needs assessment processes we are talking about. So in reference to environment, natural resources, transitional justice mechanisms and processes should, 1, ensure these needs assessment processes pay particular attention to the environment and natural resources and incorporate a component on post-conflict environmental and natural resource assessments. These processes should ensure post-conflict environmental and natural resource assessments consider, 1, the key impacts of the conflict on the environment and natural resources that cause further degradation, damage and dysfunctionality of the ecosystems, the risks posed to the human and non-human population in question, particular effects on minority and indigenous and displaced communities, the potential challenge or opportunities for peace building and transitional justice. And lastly, they should ensure that the assessments designed and adapted in the post-conflict mitigation, development, and reconstruction efforts are sensitive to the environment and natural resource concerns. And principle number 9, last one, formulate post-conflict reconstruction and development policies and programs that promote sustainable protection of the environment and natural resources. So transitional justice mechanisms and processes should, 1, promote the formulation of policies and programs in the post-conflict reconstruction processes that address the use, access, ownership, and integrated management of the environment and natural resources. 2, recognize the urgency to rehabilitate, restore, remediate, and conserve the environment and natural resources. 3, they should draw attention to the need to minimize the environmental impact of reconstruction, especially in cases where natural resources are subject to multiple competitive pressures as they support multiple peace-building goals. 4, they should recognize that tensions triggered by environmental damage or contested access to natural resources may lead to renewed violent conflict, deepen human suffering and human rights violations, and increase vulnerability. They should promote the creation of platforms for dialogue, confidence building, and cooperation by leveraging the multiple access to environmental and natural resources to propel economic growth, create revenues, and enhance sustainable livelihoods. And lastly, be alert to potential negative interactions between different peace-building priorities by governmental, economic, and social institutions necessary for sustained peace. And that is the final principle. So the submission is that in reference to these 9 principles, as transitional justice mechanisms and processes look into them, they should address the issues in here within the transitional justice processes that they are undertaking so that they can address the abuse and the violation of the environment as they address the abuse and violation of the human rights of the human population concerned. It is quite a mouthful. Thank you so much for listening. I really appreciate it. Up to you, Sarah.
Thank you very much, Munini. Yeah, so I give the participants a couple of seconds to digest. I haven't spotted any particular questions yet in the chat. Just feel free to either write it in the chat, or if you want to immediately talk to Munini or some of the others, also feel free to raise your virtual or digital hand. Munini, maybe you have specific questions to the participants to start out with. Or I see a hand, Karen.
Hi, thank you, Munini and everybody. That was really comprehensive. I think this is a fantastic draft. I'll take my hand down, by the way. I think this is a fantastic draft. It's so comprehensive. Yeah, I think it's got some really, really strong elements to it as well. And so I think, well, first of all, well done to everybody for putting this together. I liked the dimension of us finally really starting to talk about the environment as a victim, and the notion that, well, the notion of victimhood, the notion of victimhood in international criminal measures and systems, but more so in the sense of reparations for victims. So I think that's a really positive approach, and really one I think that we can focus on a bit more, I think, in the future as well, bringing that to light a bit more, as you say, through the human rights and through the pure environment sense. And I really like the idea of making entry points for environmental peace building and reference to the intrinsic value of the environment. So there was so much there. It was so full and rich. I think the only question I had, I think it's really, really strong draft. It's a really small question as well. I think at some point you mentioned leveraging restoration, I assume said opportunities. And I just wondered if you could expand on that just a little bit. What do you, I think I know what you mean, but what do you mean, what you're thinking about in the sense of leveraging restoration projects or opportunities?
Okay, thank you, Karen. We can take another question.
Or maybe you answer, and while you're answering, some people have a bit more time to either way write their question in the chat or go after you.
Okay, great. That was the last principle, where it says formulate post-conflict reconstruction and development policies and programs that promote sustainable protection to the environment and natural resources. And it says promote the creation of platforms for dialogue, confidence building, and cooperation by leveraging the multiple access to environmental and natural resources to propel economic growth. It means promote the creation of platforms for dialogue, confidence, by leveraging the multiple access to environmental and natural resources to propel. Let me get this. When countries are doing post-conflict programs and policies, they should, and they are having platforms for dialogue with communities to help develop, like, for instance, to help like the Kashasha Court, the way they were doing the dialogue processes or the justice processes to address issues. Within those processes, issues of natural resources and environment come up. So they should not be sidelined, but they should be leveraged to actually help move economic growth and create avenues and enhance sustainable livelihoods. Most of the time, we find that these issues are sidelined and they are not. So the argument is leverage on those points that have to do with the resources. For instance, people are talking about farms, people are talking about food security within these dialogues. How do we leverage on those discussions? That is the point within these policies and programs so that they don't fall off the crack. Because most of the times, like we have seen in one of the principles, economic, social, cultural, they fall off the crack. Most of the time it's civil and political. So even when these economic, social, cultural come up, they're not given the attention that they need to be given. But these policies, once they are input there, then they should leverage on those small points that may look not important because they're not civil and political, they're economic and cultural. Karen, does it make sense?
Yes, absolutely. Yep. Thanks.
Okay. And thanks, Karen, for all the writing you do. Thank you so much. I read quite a number of your work and it's very helpful and it has helped a lot. Yeah, glad to have you here. Thank you. Another question?
Any other questions? Either way, raise your hand or unmute yourself. I think we are, yeah, a number where that still works. If people, and if I may, Munini, I actually would be curious to hear from John. Because believe me, I'm well aware of the difficulties of member states policy change. And since we have you here as an expert, I would just be curious from your perspective, do you think anything in these supplementary notes would be particularly challenging to be incorporated? Like, do you expect any specific challenges regarding some of the aspects that Munini mentioned?
Yeah, thank you very much for that question, Sarah. I have gone through the documents and I made my comments, which I believe Munini must have gone through. Like, for example, changing the guideline to supplementary. You know, I am not a student of environment. You know, but you know, some of the things that I was just, when I was going through the questions, was, you know, looking at environment, that, you know, can environment be regarded as victim and things like that, you know. So those were just some issues that came, that I threw the question back to Munini when she's forwarded it for to us for comment at the African Union. So those are some of the things that you might look at critically. You see, for me, the reason why I say supplementary, there is nothing like a custodian of total knowledge. So we do have supplementary where we are as African Union, where we are not looking at it. Your organization like us, or a body like yours, coming up with additional recommendation is really great. But however, having said that, there is also the issue of political economy of this type of document, and we should, I work, in intergovernmental organizations, and there are issues of, where it took, for example, it took us 10 years for us to develop, finalize, and adopt the AU, African Union Transitional Justice Policy. So you can be rest assured that even this document that you are drafting, before you realize it, there is going to be so many, parties that are interested in it, the multinationals operating, on the continent and in other parts of the globe, that are the one perpetuating these human rights violations, So don't be surprised that there's going to be some that will want to kill the document and will not want, the institutions, and we work against the institution, going along and having the document. But having said that, there are also some member states that, I had Monini making reference to Ogoniland in the Niger Delta of Nigeria, where I happen to come from. And also, there are also environment challenges in some other part of the continent, in the eastern part of the continent. So I think those are some of the issues that you have to look at. But if you look at the African Union Transitional Justice Policy too, you see that there are benchmarks. There are benchmarks along with each of the pillars of the 11 pillars of the African Union Transitional Justice Policy. So your argument from my own reading is that environment and natural resources is that it should be another complementary, supplementary pillar. So in a concrete term, how will member states, go about it in implementing it? And that's one thing that I want, Monini to take into consideration. When you look if you look at the pillar, one of the pillar which deals with the accountability, for example, under the transitional justice policy, you will see that there are benchmarks. The benchmarks indicate the how, and which is what might still need to be, added to this particular document, this supplementary document. How, for example, if you take the first one of the principle, you talk about legal and institutional framework that anchor on the guiding principles. You take, for example, consider environment and natural resources as victim of conflict and war, beneficiary of transitional justice process, and subject of right. So if member states that is implementing transitional justice mechanism want to address this issue, how? Some of us that are some are legal experts, they are governance experts, they are psychosocial experts. They don't know how about the environment, how to go about it. So these are the questions that member states will be asking. That yes, we have read it, but how do we go about it? So those are some of the issues that may likely come up. And finally, this type of document, we already have the African Union policy in place already. Is that at the end of the day, it would be nice for I don't know, probably maybe majority of you are environment expert, natural resource governance expert, to take a thorough look at it. Because, the African Union these days, they don't just, adopt any document like that. If they are going to look at this document, for example, what is going to happen is that they are going to invite environmentalists, specialists in environment and natural resources to take a look at this document. So before this document, will receive consideration, it must have thoroughly been reviewed, and so that it's not only the dots being removed, but the critical issues on environment being addressed. I wanted to transmit it to the environment unit, the environment division, but unfortunately there is no time for me, and some of them are not, around. They were also busy with their own meeting. So what I would have done is to also forward it to our colleagues at the environment division to take a look at it. So what I'm trying to say in a nutshell is that there should be a thorough review of this document for it to gain acceptance by the member states. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'm very sorry, I missed a hand before. Anuna, I think you had your hand up before and I didn't see you.
Yeah, good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
Good, did I say good afternoon, wherever you are? Yeah.
Yeah.
I think my first question wanted to go to Mr. John. I'm from Nigeria, precisely in Abuja, and I'm a journalist.
I think we have a bit troubles understanding you. I'm not sure if it's only me or my internet connection. I think you're breaking
Okay,
up.
can you hear me?
Try it again.
Okay, but can you hear me clearly now?
I'm afraid not well enough that we understand your question. Are you able to write in the chat, maybe alternatively?
No. Can I go ahead with my question? Sorry, Sarah, can you get me?
It's a bit tricky, but
Okay.
maybe try now. It seems better now.
Okay. My question I wanted to ask John from AU. This draft by
I'm very sorry. We can barely understand you. I didn't really get. Are you maybe able to write the question in the chat?
Okay.
I'm very sorry for that.
Can I just ask, maybe if Anuna switches her camera off as now, maybe if she tries again, sometimes it seems to help with the bandwidth, what I know about technology.
Yeah, is she still here? I don't know, somehow she disappeared, at least from my screen. Maybe she looked.
Okay.
No, she's still here, yeah.
Yeah. What, can you hear me now, Sarah?
Yes, now I think it's good.
Fine. I said my question is going to Mr. John from the AU. So my question is that how often do they checkmate the African state members on implementing this transitional justice program? And at the end of it, they should make a kind of a checkmate to make sure that each state are actually carrying out what they have said they should do. Because to me, I see environment as a living being. Do you understand? And I see our natural resources as a living being. Without it, we can't make an ends meet. You see the kind of thing that is going. I think he's from Nigeria. Me too, I'm from Nigeria. Probably I'm from Imo State, but I reside in Abuja, and most of my projects are in the north. He sees the headers, the farmers, how they battle about land as a natural resources, and livelihood are cut short. There is no mix of livelihood. This wants to dominate. I'm the one supposed to make use of the land. I'm the one supposed to make use of the land. You see, the farmers, they will plant. I'm an agronomist, so I know what the conflict looks like. And Munini too should also bring out a kind of statement or a framework that will make natural resources not to be an instigating conflict factor. To me, because that's where I work mostly, I sensitize youth on conflict factor regarding to natural resources too. Then, and at the end of it, they should also make sure that the post-conflict measures must take cognizance of livelihood. Every post-conflict measure or the transitional policy they are also trying to create must make sure that they recognize or take cognizance of people's livelihood, not even only the health, livelihood most, because without livelihood, people don't make an ends meet. Do you see it? That is just my question and my contribution. Thank you.
Thank you very much. John, do you want to respond?
No, I think this is very pertinent intervention, particularly when she was trying to define the non-living things, trying to link the non-living things to rights, which also has indirect connection, to the rights of the living. And I think those are areas where we need to tie the knot properly for us to be able to define it and get it across. The second point is with regard to implementation. The AUTJP is a soft law that was adopted, and by all the member states. But implementation, as you all know, is one of the core challenges, to intergovernmental organizations, not only the African Union alone, but and that is the reason why we tried to work with different stakeholders. For example, like your own group, the civil society organization, so that we can, hold our member state accountable using different mechanisms, either using either using the government initiatives to hold them accountable through the laws, reporting, and all the rest of them, and also the civil society organization, advocacy, and the rest of them like that. As for us at the African Union, on a yearly basis, after the adoption of the in 2019, we have reported once on the implementation of the AUTJP. And what we did, there is a committee of the Permanent Representative Committee made up of all the ambassadors of the African Union member state in Addis Ababa. So we have what we call the Permanent Representative Committee. So there is this PRC subcommittee on human rights, democracy, and governance. So we have reported the first report. The first report has been submitted to them. And there we explain how each member state that have transitional justice mechanism will report on how they are implementing the mechanism, and we also give recommendation on how they can improve in the implementation of transitional justice. Like, for example, the next report that we will be doing, hopefully in 2022, this meeting that we are having, and how a group is beginning to tell us that we need to enhance and also improve, the content of the AUTJP are part of some of the things that we are going to be reporting on, and also making recommendations to countries that we know. Like, for example, if you look at Chad, Chad is currently planning to implement transitional justice. And when you look at the Chad Basin, you will see that environment is a key issue there, driving conflict crisis. So these are the type of things that we will recommend, that we propose that the supplementary that is being, prepared by a group, in addition to the as an addendum to the African Union Transitional Justice policies, should be considered by a state like Chad. So we do report, and when we report like that, member states take some of those our report and recommendations seriously. At times, they may not take all, but at least they take the recommendation very seriously. So this is how we fare in time of implementation and of the policy and other documents.
Thank you very much, John. Munini, do you want to also add something to this?
I just want to agree with what she says. Natural resources should be addressed so that they're not a factor causing more conflict. And that is what the policy in many, the supplementary note in many sentiments tries to say. If we do this, we might mitigate against more conflicts being caused, or more damage, or more human rights violations when we address the environment and natural resources, resource abuses and violations that have gone on. So I absolutely agree with her that that should be addressed strongly, so that we can address the upcoming conflicts because of natural resources. So it's just one of the amongst many other mitigating factors. Thank you.
Sorry, I just, Sarah, I just have a question, and I don't,
Please.
yeah, this draft document, I know that I have, you know, I was opportune to go through it and also to make comment. It could be very hectic, you know, when different stakeholders are coming up with their comments on the policy document. But from my little experience, you know, working on policy development at the African Union, it could be very, you know, tasky and, you know, make life difficult, where you have to work sleepless nights, you know, to make correction and the rest of them like that. If it is possible, I don't know, maybe all the participants, whether you've had the opportunity, you know, to review the document, you review the document, do a critique. Let's make it available to environment specialists as much as possible, so that you know, they help us do critique, so that at the end of the day, you know, as we say, the end will justify the means. It might take a long period, it might, but at least we want to see the impact. So I think this is what I would want to say, so that, like, for example, this our lady who is a specialist in you know, who natural resources governance, you know, and so many others. Let's reach out to scholars, let's reach out to practitioners on environment to help us, you know, look at it properly, so that when we are presenting, because now we are at the African Union, we are also beginning to have a bridge, you know, a mixture of both practitioners and scholars in the house. So we cannot afford to take you know, a document that will not, you know, really fly to them for consideration. Thank you.
Thank you, John. And I see another hand. Ifinda Mirele.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, perfect.
Hi. Yeah,
Hi.
thank you. Yes, my question is for Munini. Again, thank you so much for the presentation. And I think my question is twofold. First of all, I'm just happy with, you know, reading the supplementary notes. I'm originally from the DRC, and it's really relevant because many of the conflicts that we've had in that region, you know, had to do with natural resources, and also the ensuing degradation of the environment. So my question is, first of all, I believe as well that there cannot be a successful TJ implementation in that region without taking into account natural resources and the environment. So my question to you, Munini, is do you have any, let's say, case studies? And I'm sure you know, you've conducted, I mean, this has been, I can see it's been a thorough process, and a lot of consultation was conducted. I just want to know if you had into account as well the issues of the DRC when, you know, drafting the supplementary notes, and as well any case studies, any research, because at this point there is a need for that type of rigorous research just to prove how effective a TJ implementation would be if it took into account, you know, if it takes into account environmental and natural resources. So do you have anything in that regard just to complete the process?
Thank you very much, Mirele, for that question. We have looked, I have looked at the peace agreements that have been done in some of the post-conflicts or countries that are going through transitional justice. And like the comprehensive peace agreement of Sudan with the SPLM, the also peace agreement for South Sudan, some of them, they do incorporate the issues of natural resources, some of the issues of natural resources. When you look at the agreement and this supplementary note, they may not all be in, but a few of the elements have been captured. The question is, has that been implemented? Because that needs to be implemented for us to have a case study. The only case study I have seen is the one that was presented during our West African presentation webinar by Piagbara Saro, who was coming from Nigeria, the Ogoni peoples, where the UNDP had done an assessment, which is one of the principles that is being proposed, the post-conflict environment and natural resources assessment. They did an assessment, and one of the things they proposed was the carbon remediation of the grounds that have been polluted by the oil drilling. And that is something that is actually going on. So that is a case study you can say has been taken on board because of the recommendations that were done by the assessment that was done by UNDP. So that we can say is doable and it has been done before. The other place where we have checked is the Sierra Leone and Liberia. When we looked at, was it one of those TJRC, one of their mandates was to look at economic issues, and the natural resources were under the economic issues. But from my research, they had been captured under the question of revenue allocation and management, not so much as the environment needs remediation, the environment needs rehabilitation, conservation, and restoration because of the damage of the mining and the logging that had taken place. That was not captured. So as the years go by and as the countries come out of conflict, we are seeing some level of improvement. And so this supplementary note is coming in to help the countries improve the component of addressing environment and natural resources. You might look at other TJRC processes or other peace agreements that had been done way earlier, and they don't capture environment and natural resources as proposed by this supplement or as captured by upcoming peace processes that we are seeing, like the one I'm talking about for Sudan and South Sudan, which are very recent. So the case studies are there, a few, but I want to believe we will continue to see more as we continue to make recommendations and to urge the countries to take up environment and natural resources. Like John has mentioned, the Chad transitional justice process may be starting anytime soon. So from the African Union, John's desk recommendations from what you're discussing, the peace process or the peace documents you will see from the Chad will have more refined incorporation of environment and natural resources as we go on, unlike maybe some that were done 10 years before.
Thank you, Monique.
You're welcome.
Sorry, did I interrupt someone? I'm just being a bit mindful of time, and I'm not sure if everyone is able to stay a bit longer. So maybe we take up the suggestion at this point also from John of really going back also to the text and encourage everyone who's here, but maybe also experts that you know, to have a review on the guidelines that Monini shared. Monini, I don't know if you have a smart idea of doing that either way in a shared document or other ways of that, so that we can actually continue the discussion. At least for now, I would suggest we close the question and answers here for now. And before I'm handing over to Carl for some final remarks, I just want to say once again, thank you very much for being here, for contributing. I think NPAX and also Monini has once more showed that they're able to gather this kind of collective intelligence in the room. And for me, it was really interesting and inspiring to listening to you. I hope that we will be continuing working on this together, and yeah, that Monini will continue to be our bridge into this very specific work that you're doing. And with that, I would give it to Carl.
Thank you all. It's been fantastic listening to this discussion, and more broadly, following the evolution of the dialogue around this issue over the past year. I have been fascinated by how all the different perspectives on this, people coming at it from different angles, whether it's livelihoods or cooperation or justice or accountability, or more from the environmental side. The dialogue's been very, it's had so many different perspectives, not just regions, but disciplines and experiences and levels. And I think that the guidelines that are coming out of this are an important touchstone for people to be thinking about how do we better integrate environment into transitional justice processes, and how do we integrate environmental peace building and transitional justice better. I think that having it contextualized across a range of different experiences in Africa really adds not only rigor, but also resilience and broader applicability of these guidelines, not only to different situations in Africa, but more broadly. I also want to recognize the outstanding effort that was put into this. We EOI used to have a president who boxed. He liked to use the phrase "boxing above one's weight." Where you don't have much by way of resources, but the resources that you have, speaking particularly to Manini, you've really managed to make those resources have an impact. And I've been very impressed by what you and your team have done, and with the support from the Bosch Foundation. This is really an impressive effort, and I want to congratulate you and the team. I also want to express our appreciation to the Bosch Foundation Alumni Network for supporting this and engaging in this really important issue. And so thank you all for your attention, and we look forward to further discussing and sharing this at the Second International Conference on Environmental Peace Building.
Thank you all.